Are you ready? Welcome to Conflict Nexus Report, where we bring latest updates about global world crises and latest news. Hang tight for what we have for you today. On Saturday morning, April 18, 2026, at a moment when a fragile ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon was supposed to signal the beginning of calm after weeks of devastating conflict, a French soldier serving under the United Nations flag was ambushed and killed on a quiet road in southern Lebanon, a place where peace is often announced long before it is ever truly felt. He was part of a mission tasked with something deceptively simple but extraordinarily dangerous, reopening a route to a UN post that had been cut off by weeks of relentless fighting, clearing explosives, and restoring access to a position that had effectively been isolated by war. He never made it. Staff Sergeant Florian Montorio, a member of France's elite 17th Parachute Engineer Regiment based in Montauban, was struck during a close-range ambush carried out by an armed group operating in an area where lines between war and ceasefire blur almost instantly. His fellow peacekeepers attempted to pull him out under active fire, dragging him away from the kill zone while bullets still cut through the air, but despite their efforts, they could not save him. And 3 others were left seriously wounded. Within hours, French President Emmanuel Macron publicly stated that all indications pointed toward Hezbollah as being responsible for the attack. Hezbollah denied any involvement. And just like that, a ceasefire that was meant to begin stabilizing southern Lebanon began showing signs of unraveling before it had even fully taken hold. Before we go deeper into the geopolitical consequences of this attack, it is important to pause and understand the man whose life was lost. Because behind every headline is a human story that often gets overshadowed by the scale of the conflict itself. Florian Montorio was not just a soldier, he was a specialist trained in one of the most demanding roles in modern military operations, serving as a parachute engineer, which meant his job was not only to fight when necessary, but to build, to clear, and to create safe passage where none existed. On that morning, his unit had been assigned to clear explosive ordnance along a road in the village of Gandoria, a critical route that needed to be reopened in order to reconnect an isolated UNIFIL outpost that had been cut off during the weeks of intense fighting between Hezbollah forces and the Israeli military. According to official accounts, the patrol walked directly into an ambush that had been prepared in advance, with attackers positioned at extremely close range, leaving little room for reaction or escape once the shooting began. Montorio was hit almost immediately, and despite the rapid response of his comrades, the severity of his injuries proved fatal. In France, tributes began pouring in, with President Macron describing him as a hero who died in service of peace, and emphasizing the nation's commitment to those deployed in dangerous missions abroad. But this was not an isolated loss, and that fact is what makes the story even more troubling. To understand why a French soldier was even present in southern Lebanon, you need to understand UNIFIL, the United Nations interim force in Lebanon, which has been operating in the region for nearly half a century under a mandate that was originally intended to be temporary, but has instead become one of the longest-running peacekeeping missions in modern history. Established in 1978 following Israel's first invasion of southern Lebanon, UNIFIL was tasked with confirming Israeli withdrawal, restoring peace and security, and assisting the Lebanese government in regaining authority over the south. Today, the mission includes around 10,000 peacekeepers from dozens of countries, all deployed along the Blue Line, a tense and heavily monitored boundary separating Lebanon from Israel. Their role is not to fight, and crucially, it is not to disarm Hezbollah or directly confront Israeli forces, but rather to observe, report, and attempt to maintain a fragile balance between 2 sides that have repeatedly shown a willingness to escalate into open conflict. In reality, this places UN peacekeepers in an incredibly vulnerable position, as they operate in a space where they are present but not fully empowered, visible but not protected, and often caught directly in the crossfire of conflicts they are not authorized to stop. The conflict that ultimately led to Montorio's death did not begin in Lebanon, but was instead triggered by a much larger regional escalation that started in Iran, drawing multiple actors into a chain reaction that quickly spread across borders. In late February 2026, a major military campaign targeting Iran's leadership and infrastructure set off a series of retaliatory actions. with Hezbollah acting as a powerful regional ally of Iran, launching attacks into northern Israel, prompting a massive Israeli response that included airstrikes and a ground incursion into southern Lebanon. The result was a humanitarian crisis of staggering proportions, with thousands killed, entire communities displaced, and already fragile infrastructure pushed to the point of collapse. Lebanon, which has long struggled with economic instability and political paralysis, once again found itself serving as the battleground for a conflict shaped by forces far beyond its borders. Throughout this period of escalating violence, UN peacekeepers remained on the ground, continuing their mission despite increasingly dangerous conditions, and as the weeks went on, it became clear that they were no longer being treated as neutral observers. Reports documented multiple incidents in which UNIFIL forces were fired upon, injured, or even killed, with responsibility attributed at different times to both Israeli forces and Hezbollah fighters. Vehicles were struck, outposts were damaged, surveillance equipment was destroyed, and patrols were repeatedly placed in situations where the risk of attack was no longer theoretical, but immediate and constant. By the time the ceasefire was announced, UNIFIL had effectively become one of the most exposed and vulnerable peacekeeping missions anywhere in the world. When the ceasefire finally came into effect on April 17th, it was seen by many as a desperately needed pause, offering civilians a chance to return home and begin assessing the damage left behind by weeks of conflict. UNIFIL units began moving quickly to reconnect isolated positions and restore access routes, including the road near Gandoria where Montorio's patrol was deployed. But the ceasefire existed largely at the level of governments and official agreements, and not necessarily at the level of armed groups operating on the ground. Hezbollah, critically, was not directly involved in negotiating the ceasefire, raising serious questions about whether its fighters would feel bound by its terms. In such an environment, the line between peace and conflict becomes dangerously thin, and for those operating in the field, that ambiguity can be deadly. The ambush itself was described as deliberate and highly coordinated, suggesting prior knowledge of the patrol's movement and a willingness to target peacekeepers despite their neutral status. In the aftermath, UNIFIL launched an investigation, initially indicating that the attack likely came from non-state actors, with Hezbollah being named as a possible source. France responded strongly, with President Macron demanding accountability and calling on Lebanese authorities to take immediate action against those responsible. Hezbollah, however, rejected the accusations, maintaining that it had no involvement in the attack and urging patience while investigations continued. This clash of narratives highlights a deeper issue: the difficulty of establishing accountability in a region where multiple armed actors operate simultaneously, often without clear lines of command or responsibility. In Paris, the political response was not just about this single incident, but about a broader pattern that has been emerging, as French forces have increasingly found themselves targeted in multiple conflict zones within a short span of time. The loss of Florian Montorio followed closely behind another deadly incident involving French personnel in a separate theater, raising difficult questions about the risks being faced by troops deployed in peacekeeping and stabilization missions. For France, which has long maintained a strong presence in Lebanon and played a significant role in supporting its political and security structures, the situation presents a dilemma: how to continue supporting peace efforts while ensuring the safety of its own soldiers. At the same time, a larger and perhaps more consequential development is unfolding in the background, one that could fundamentally reshape the security landscape of southern Lebanon. UNIFIL is approaching the end of its mandate. By the end of 2026, the mission will begin a phased withdrawal, and within a year, the long-standing presence of UN peacekeepers in the region will come to an end. This decision reflects growing frustration among some international actors who argue that the mission has failed to achieve its objectives, while others warn that its absence could create a dangerous vacuum. Without UNIFIL, the responsibility for maintaining stability will fall largely on the Lebanese army, which faces significant limitations, while Hezbollah remains heavily armed and deeply entrenched in the region. And that is the larger context in which Florian Montorio was killed, a region on the edge of renewed conflict, a ceasefire that exists more on paper than in reality, and a peacekeeping mission that is nearing its final chapter. His death is not just an isolated tragedy, but a signal of the risks that lie ahead as the structures that have helped contain conflict for decades begin to fade away. As the situation continues to develop, the questions remain unanswered, the tensions unresolved, and the future uncertain, with each new incident carrying the potential to either push the region towards stability or pull it back into violence. For now, the ceasefire holds, at least officially, but on the ground, the reality is far more fragile. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and turn on the subscribe button to be notified whenever we drop latest news.